there are numbers and there are numbers. So I came across one of the latter kind recently. Numbers that tell a story about a whole chapter in history. Not small n numbers, big N numbers. So check this one out. Most Americans, 68%, are grappling with or have dealt with financial trauma. So most Americans are financially traumatized. Let me put on my economist hat for a second, okay? Whew. This is a number that should give us all pause. It's like a 9-alarm fire, right? And one of the strange things that happens, especially in America, is the way that the media reports the economy is kind of very detached from the reality of it. So if you think about media coverage of the economy, there's always this perpetual kind of like cheerleading thing happening, right? The economy's booming, things are going great, blah, blah, blah. But if you actually look at the statistics, they're incredibly dire. The majority of a society feeling financially traumatized, when I think about that as an economist, that is like, that's like a giant black hole sucking the life out of a society. So I'm going to put that in perspective for you just in a second. First, we're going to talk about like, what should the number be, right? What should we expect the number to be? 20%, 20%, maybe 30% would be, I don't know, reasonable. I don't think anybody should be financially traumatized. But if we're going to think about, well, what does it mean to be a rich, developed country, an advanced nation? Surely the number of people who are financially traumatized should not be 70%, because trauma is a big deal, right? That's one of the things that this article is trying to talk about, that this is a real process of wounding that goes on. And us economists call it scarring. So, there's different ways to think about the social scientific effects. One is the psychological effect, wounding, right? You get really affected, deeply traumatized, hurt, scared, distressed. And it changes your outlook, as the article says, for life. Us economists think about it in a different way. We have a phenomenon called scarring. And scarring means that if you go through a large financial shock, if you're financially traumatized, your life potential goes down permanently. You are on a permanently lower trajectory of income, savings, possibilities, opportunities, mobility, all of these things. So this is a really bad thing, and we should be talking about it much, much, much more. So let's first talk about, how real is this? Is this just something that the survey has kind of cooked up, or are there larger signs of it? Let me give you some more statistics, because this is very real. I mean, the statistics are all around us, but we don't talk about them enough. So here's another one for you. Check this out. I'll throw it up on the screen for you. Nearly 75% of working adults in the United States are stressed about their finances, according to a recent Your Money survey, with 61% of Americans reporting living paycheck to paycheck. To feel financially secure, around 70% of Americans say they would need an annual salary of at least $150,000. Now, that's more than twice the median household income. So comfort itself, right, just a kind of stable life, has become something that's very, very unaffordable, more than twice the median income. Okay, so way out of reach of the average person. That should give us all pause. That is a 9-alarm fire. Why? When we see this, it's like a shockwave going off in the heart of the economy. And that shockwave ripples out across democracy, the polity, across society itself. So what do I mean by that? Well, think of a very famous and textbook example, right? I don't know, something like the Weimar Republic. And I don't want to stretch the bounds of credibility and be hyperbolic, but this is the kind of effect that financial scarring, financial wounding, financial trauma has. When people find it hard or impossible to make ends meet, which is what these statistics are talking about, right? When you have the majority of people saying they're living paycheck to paycheck, and some feeling of stability would take more than twice the average income, meaning that it's way, way, way out of reach of the average person, that destabilizes everything. The economy does feel rigged against you. And we'll cover in future videos exactly how that's the case, by the way. So a process of political destabilization happens as a consequence of failing economies. Okay, that's really important to understand, because in American discourse, one of the mistakes that it makes, and media goes along with this mistake, is that A, the economy is not covered as something that's failing very often. The statistics are ignored. And B, because that's the case, the wider ramifications are almost never considered. But we know this beyond a shadow of a doubt. When economies fail, there are huge, huge swings, usually towards the extreme right, towards demagoguery, scapegoating, and a process of political implosion takes hold. This is very real. And you can think about it not just in the context of the Weimar Republic. Think about, any number of, Latin American political implosions. You can think about this process happening across Asia in the 90s as well. So this is a very well documented phenomenon in economics. When we see financial trauma, there are huge consequences in terms of political destabilization. Let's go back to the quote for a second, because another thing that happens is that societies begin to implode structurally. So what does that mean? Well, let's go back to this quote about financial trauma. Numbers about generations of financial trauma. So Gen Xers sit at the top, 74%, followed by millennials, 71%, Gen Zers, 64%, boomers, 63%, and the silent generation, 60%. Gen X leads the pack. It's a sign of how they grew up and of their life stage. So what does that mean? That means that financial trauma we're not talking about some kind of anomaly or hiccup, right? We're not talking about some kind of small temporary event that's affecting maybe, one social group and part of one generation. No, this is something that is ripping across all society. So it's intergenerational, we would say, to put it formally. Now, what does that mean? That means that the social structure of society itself begins to collapse. A healthy social structure is something like each generation doing better than the one before it, or at least kind of, maintaining their position. But we don't see that. In terms of this data, every generation seems to be more financially stressed than the one before it. Right now, Gen Xers lead the pack because they're in their kind of prime earning years. But presumably, as millennials and Gen Zers age, they will feel more and more financial trauma too, because they are more financially traumatized at their age, presumably, than Gen Xers were. So we see an acceleration of this process of traumatization too. It's a 9-alarm fire. Because when we see that kind of social structure break down, it rips apart the bonds of society. So what else do we know about America? Well, we know that people are incredibly pessimistic about the future. We know that trust has shattered. We know that social bonds have ruptured as you go down through the generations, to the point where things like friendship itself is becoming a luxury. So why is that? Well, those are some of the consequences. That's some of the fallout of financial trauma. When you are stuck in this vicious cycle of just working harder and harder every day to make ends meet, and yet you can't do it, all of these basic things of life, friendship, trust, happiness, experiences, become luxuries, as do the even more kind of basic things to set up a stable life, right? Savings, investments, all of these kinds of things. So this is a real 9-alarm fire, because when the social structure of society rips itself apart, we begin to see the kinds of maladies that are emerging in America at a social level. Loneliness epidemics, epidemics of deaths of despair, suicide, depression, anxiety. And that's pretty predictable, right? Because this is real trauma that we're talking about. It's not a game, it's not a joke. These are people's lives, and they're being deeply wounded by this. Remember how we talked about scarring? You can see that in this data too. Scarring means, remember, a permanent effect. My chances, my opportunities, my trajectory in life is permanently lower. This experience has scarred me. That is what these data suggest also. When you look intergenerationally and you see more and more financial trauma emerging across generations. So this is real stuff. It's really severe and dire stuff, okay? I want to tell you as an economist that we should never see this happen. The number of people who should be financially traumatized in a rich society, a developed nation, an advanced nation is zero. Nobody should be financially traumatized anywhere, but especially not in a rich country. And even at the upper bounds of credibility, maybe 20, 30% if you are going through a rough time in the economy, temporarily. But when we see 70% of people experiencing these profound levels of distress, systemically, intergenerationally, across decades and generations, there is something really, really wrong happening. That means that your economic model is failing, your society is grinding to a halt, it's structurally going to implode. It means you're going to experience a process of political destabilization. So all of those things we're beginning to see, and I think that we need to take these numbers much more seriously in the States, right? The cheerleading approach to the economy, things are booming, everything's great, blah, 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 go down the line and repeat it over and over again. It's got to stop because it's not helping, right? What point is there to saying the economy is booming? 70% of people across generations, that means over time, tell you that they're financially traumatized, that they're in profound distress, that their lives are incredibly messed up by this. It doesn't serve any purpose, right? It only fans the flames of distrust. It opens space for scapegoating and finger pointing. It opens room for the demagogues to come along and peddle their conspiracy theories. So we have to be much more conversant with this, much more literate with this, and begin discussing it as the huge, huge 9-alarm fire that it is, because it's not a joke. We should never see this happen. And when it does, it tells us society is in a really, really bad place. Okay? That was a lot. That was a bit scary. I'm really sorry about that. But, join me again. You know what to do. Like, share, subscribe. Please do it, by the way. I'm just setting up this channel, and I could really use your help. So I hope you like that, and I'll talk to you soon. Thank you. Bye.